Well, it's really good to be here. I'm going to again introduce myself because I know there's some folks, I assume most of you know me, but there are some people that don't. My name is Rich Hayes. In my former life, I was a hospice chaplain. I've retired. So now I come here every once in a while, and I'm really grateful for that. So, many years ago, I met a hospice patient named Larry. And when I introduced myself, he told me that he wasn't religious. I told him that was okay because I wasn't either. So he invited me to sit down, and he asked me, first thing he asked me, he says, "Do you believe there's something after this?" So I wanted to make sure that I understood the question and clarified it. So I asked him, I said, "Are you talking about something continuing after the body dies?" And he said, "Yes, that's it." So I told him, I said, "Yeah, I do." So he said, "Why?" I told him that it was based on a lot of things. Many of the things I'd observed working with people near the end of life, as well as some of the stories these people had shared with me. I told him I even had a few that had reported to me that they had actually died and been revived and had the experience of being outside the body, observing that revival process. What's often referred to as a near-death experience. Anyway, I also told him that I read numerous studies regarding those near-death experiences. So that's why. Well, he responded to me, he says, the brain is an amazing organ, and it will create an experience that will protect you as it's shutting down. But it's not real. It's just giving you that experience. So he looks at me, he says, "Death is lights out. Game over. It's the end." So, because in all truth, I hadn't died. I couldn't say with 100% certainty that I knew. And I told him that. I said, I hadn't done it yet. I said, "But you asked me a question, you asked me my opinion, and I gave you my opinion based on the reasons I just told you." But Larry's mind was made up. He was 100% sure, certain that there was nothing. So I could have turned it around and said, "Well, how can you be 100% sure? Because you haven't done it yet either." But I didn't do that. I didn't do that. Because this was his belief. And here's the deal. My role as a chaplain was to honor and respect a person's beliefs, whatever they are. I wasn't there to proselytize. I wasn't there to sell religion. I wasn't there to do any of that. I was just there to accompany another human being and offer whatever support I could. So, anyway, he continued to want visits, and I visited him weekly for several months, always on Fridays. And I made my last visit of the day, of the week, because sometimes those visits went long because we talked about a lot of things. Larry was a really interesting dude. He talked to me about his life, his successes, his failures, the things that he felt good about, and the things that he would do differently if he could. He talked about his sadness and the things he would be leaving. He talked about purpose and meaning. And I really enjoyed these weekly visits. I looked forward to them. He had had an interesting life. And during all those visits, over several months, the subject of the afterlife never, ever came up. That is, until one day, as I was getting ready to leave, and I'm about to say my goodbyes, I'm getting up, and out of the blue, he asked me, "So you really think there's something after this?" But this time, rather than answering the question, I decided to ask him one of my own instead. I said, "Larry, we've had a lot of conversations. What strikes me about you is you're an open-minded guy, so are you willing to keep an open mind?" So he takes a moment to consider what I just asked him, and then he says, yes, I think I can. To which I say to him, good, because I think you are going to be pleasantly surprised. And he gives me this big grin, and he says, you know, I'd like to be surprised. But to my surprise, Larry died 2 days later. And I was shocked because he didn't seem to be close to death when I'd visited. You know, in hospice, we use the term transitioning, and transitioning is how we classify it when the patient is starting to change. And he wasn't transitioning when I was there on Friday, not in my professional opinion. Now, usually, but not always, when someone's transitioning, there are indicators, usually days or even weeks before someone actually moves into what's called actively dying. So, needless to say, when I showed up for work on Monday and I found out that he had died, I was shocked. But then I thought about our last visit and his question as I was going out the door. And that question, in retrospect, was an indicator that something might be changing within him. As I said when I started, I was in my early days with hospice. But thanks to Larry, I learned to pay attention when something like this happened with future patients. Anyway, later that day, I called his wife to offer my condolences and to check in with her and see how she was doing. And in our conversation, she talked about his last day. And by the way, he was at home, so he died at home. She talked about his last day and how she'd been with him, how his breathing kept changing, how it would slow and then it would stop for long times and then it would resume again. But he was comfortable through all of it. And then she said to me, she said, but something strange did happen just before he died. So I asked her, I said, would you be comfortable sharing that with me? And she said, sure. She says, well, all of a sudden, he sits straight up in bed. He opens his eyes really wide. He smiles. And then he lays back and takes one last long breath out, and he's gone. So, I asked her, I said, did Larry tell you about our last conversation? And she said to me, no. She said, Larry never told me what you guys talked about. I had no idea what you guys talked about. So I shared with her that last conversation. Well, she says to me, she said, well, he was definitely surprised. And she says, and he looked pretty happy about it too. I believe that sometimes our certainties can blind us to other possibilities. We see what we expect, not necessarily what really is. So paraphrasing Mark Twain, sometimes what we think we know ain't necessarily so. And I know that from personal experience for sure. That I have at times not seen something right in front of me. Like when my wife, Jane, asked me to reach into the fridge to get something, because she's over there working on the other side of the kitchen, and I can't find it. And she has to stop doing what she's doing and come back, and sure enough, as soon as she looks, it's right there. Right there, where I'd just been looking, but had not seen it. Why didn't I see it? Because in my mind, I'd pictured it differently. And what I was looking for was the picture in my mind, not what was there. Man, there's a life lesson in that right there. And the truth is that I've been wrong about a number of things I once believed or thought I knew for sure. When a mind closes around a belief or a certainty, it can be pretty tough to pry it open. And I know that was the case for me. And it can be painful. It can definitely be painful, but it's worth it. I think a big part of the spiritual journey in this life is learning to see in new ways, with fresh eyes. to go beyond the conditioning, because we're all conditioned, to go beyond the conditioning and the certainties, which can and often will cause a sort of blindness. You know what I'm talking about? So the idea for this morning's talk, because I had no idea what I was going to talk about, and that always happens, and then I get asked for a title, and when I come up with the title, then I have to figure out what I'm going to talk about. So I like to play around with words, and this morning's talk came about because I was fooling around with words, and I looked at the word know, K-N-O-W. No, K-N-O-W. And all of a sudden, I realized there's another word right in the middle of that. Exact same sounding, no, but it's N-O. It's a big difference between those two words. And that's what gave me the idea. A lot of times, a closed mind is an absolute no. Many years ago, when I began to feel a calling towards hospice chaplaincy and realized it would entail going back to school, I found all the reasons that I knew that that would not work. Why they wouldn't accept me when I applied, why I didn't have the qualifications. It caused me a lot of grief, and I drove Jane nuts, probably for about 1.5 years as I wrestled with it, because I just kept finding all the no's. But fortunately, my desire to do that work overrode my fear of failure and rejection. I wanted it bad enough to risk the rejection, and I was able to conclude that if I didn't try, I'd never really know, K-N-O-W. So I had to get beyond all those other no's that I was putting up there for myself. So this story of Larry that I shared with you all was very early, as I said, in my hospice career, and obviously I never forgot it. And this is why I've often encouraged people to keep an open mind, and I remind myself often. In Buddhism, there's a thing that's referred to as beginner's mind, and it is always, always, always encouraged. Why? Well, because in the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities. But in the experts, there are few, or maybe only one, or maybe none. In Christianity, Jesus talked and instructed that we must become as children in order to see the kingdom of heaven, which, by the way, he was always talking about and saying it was right here and now. Same idea, I guess. And I guess another way to speak of beginner's mind. That's what he was talking about, I think. When something is open, it allows things in. And this is important, as well as out. With an open mind, I can consider it like new information. What a concept. I can see things in a new way. But I can also let go of old beliefs or opinions. I can do some mental house cleaning. It's a good practice. I think one of the traps of aging, and it is, but it's just one of the traps of living, really, can be a tendency to close our minds. We all love certainty. So that tendency to close our minds is a natural response, but we're really being called to do just the opposite. It's to open. Time and again, I find that in life, You get hurt about something, you want to close your heart down, but really, that doesn't do it. You got to open. It takes courage. There's a saying about an open hand. I'm sure we've all heard it. An open hand is the only way we can receive a gift, but a closed fist can receive nothing. And I think it's the same idea. But I'm going to say this. An open mind is really important, but discernment is also. So what you keep, that idea, the idea of the mental house keeping and cleaning. Because there's a lot of important stuff out there, but there's also a lot of things that aren't true. Anyway, while I can't know, getting back to Larry, I can't know what Larry saw. What I do know, thanks to his wife, is that he took that last breath out. He was smiling. And I take that as a good sign. And it's a good reminder. It's a good reminder. And I'm really glad I asked him that question on that last visit. And I got to be honest with you, I didn't think about asking that question. It's one of those things that just came out. I heard myself ask it, but I'm really glad I did. So I'm going to leave you here, because I've gone on long enough. I'm going to leave you here with this last thought, and it comes from the preeminent philosopher and thinker and truth teller, Groucho Marx. Be open-minded, but not so open-minded that your brains fall out. So what do you think? Okay, thank you. Over to you, Cheryl.